Fear usually stems from the unknown. As humans, we're inherently afraid of that which we can't understand, occurrences that defy all logic and reason. From cryptic murders to supernatural happenings, we thirst for answers to the unexplainable. I'm Dash Finley, an avid fan of all things horror, and I'm here to guide you all on this journey as we seek the truth behind infamous mysteries. Mysteries that can only be classified as unsolved. Edgar Allan Poe was the master of the macabre and mystery. He was the inventor of detective fiction and was an early pioneer of both the science fiction and horror genres. Without Edgar Allan Poe, there is no Arthur Conan Doyle, Alfred Hitchcock, Stephen King, John Carpenter, etc. His current status as a pillar of literature and horror makes his death all the more tragic. On October 3rd, 1849, Poe, now broke and unemployed, was found delirious on the streets of Baltimore, Maryland, quote, in great distress and in need of immediate assistance, according to the man who found him, Joseph W. Walker. He was rushed to the Washington College Hospital, but was never coherent enough to explain how he came to be in this condition. He died at 5 a.m. on Sunday, October 7th. He was 40 years old. The circumstances leading up to his demise are eerily vague, and the cause of death has been disputed for over a century. My guest today is Noreen Lace. She is a writer and lecturer at California State University, Northridge, and is currently working on a fictionalized account of Edgar Allan Poe's suicide attempt. Noreen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for asking me.
So I want to dive right into the questions. There's a lot of stuff to get to. This is an incredibly fascinating topic, so let's get right to it.
Okay.
What do you believe the great Edgar Allan Poe himself would think if he were aware of what a profound effect his work has had on the literary world? And do you think he would find any irony in the mystery surrounding his death?
Okay. Let's see. He's inspired artists, James Ensor, Manet, Del Toro. We were talking about Del Toro. He's inspired Arthur Conan Doyle to write the Sherlock Holmes series. So he's inspired quite a lot. It's still going on. I think that he would think it was well deserved. He was a gentleman, but it's my understanding, he was not a humble man.
So he did have an ego.
I think so, yeah. And so I think he would feel like it was well deserved. But also I think maybe he would think some of it's a little fantastical, because if you think of the art that's inspired tattoos,
right,
which is great, but can you imagine having Edgar Allan Poe's face on your arm or your chest? I think that he might. But he might like that too. You never know. So.
Right. Well, that one major picture of him is not particularly flattering.
No, it's not. And that was actually after the questionable suicide attempt too. So and then I said would he find it ironic?
Well, you know, the mystery of his death, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you think he would find it ironic because, of course, here's someone who basically created mystery, detective fiction, among many other sort of horror dark genres, and here his own mystery about his death, you know.
Ironic, yes, but I don't think that he could have even invented a better end for himself, don't you think? I mean, think about the circumstances. You know, you get on a train and you disappear, and then when you reappear, don't know where you've been, you're not quite certain who you are, what happened to you. So yeah, I think it's something that he couldn't have even invented himself. But yes, I think he would definitely find
it's pretty wild,
yeah,
to say the least.
Yes.
The synchronicity of a man's work and his life lining up is truly bizarre. But I want to delve more into that. So can you give us a brief overview of what was happening in Edgar Allan Poe's life for, let's say, you know, a year, or in the recent time frame preceding his untimely death in the fall of 1849?
Okay.
What brought him to Baltimore?
Oh, okay. Well, he was doing actually pretty well. We think of Edgar Allan Poe as just a horror writer, but that's not all he was. He was an essayist, he was a social activist, very intelligent man, well-read, well-traveled. So he was actually touring, giving, let's see, literature lectures on his essay, The Poetic Principle, at that time. And so he was heading to Richmond. He was doing very well. He had publications, the release of a book, he was lecturing. He had not one but two girlfriends at the time. One was Sarah Whitman, and he asked her to marry, and then he met this other girl, Annie Richmond, asked her, and he told Annie, he said, well, I love her poet to poetess, but I love you man to woman, right? So,
very smooth.
Yes, yes. So he was doing quite well, publishing a lot. After both of the women kind of refused, that's when he almost died of a laudanum overdose. And I don't know if you're aware, laudanum is kind of the opiate that was over the counter at that time, and it was used for headaches, for illness, and so he was using it for headaches.
Right. It's essentially like a form of heroin.
Yeah, it's the early form of heroin that they say, here, this will cure everything. And so he had an almost overdose the year preceding his death. And so some people believe it was a suicide attempt because he was rejected by these two women, but others believe it was an accidental overdose because he wasn't used to taking laudanum. And he says that in one of the letters that he writes, that he wasn't used to taking it and he had a bout of it. So, but coming home, he passes through Philadelphia. And they have a cholera epidemic there. So then he gets sick. He thinks he's dying of cholera. He doesn't die. He does finally make it to Richmond, where he finds out his teenage sweetheart, Elmira Royster Shelton, is widowed and therefore single. So he rushes, that's the way I picture it, to her house to propose marriage. She hasn't seen him in, all these years, and he proposes marriage. And the way she says it, she told him no. And he said, well, then I will go away. But he stayed. And so he was doing quite well. In the summer before his death, he was in Richmond. He was lecturing on this poetic principle. He had joined the Sons of Temperance movement. The month before he died, he had a couple lectures. He saw friends, but he was acting a little strange. And so Elmira Shelton suggested he go see a doctor. So he did see a doctor. The doctor suggested he not travel. But he was going to go. Supposedly he was going to Baltimore to pick up Maria Clem, who was his mother-in-law, Virginia's mother, and to bring them back to live with him and Elmira when they got married. So that was his reason for going to Boston.
I see.
But we know the doctor told him not to go. We know that he took somebody else's cane by mistake. He left his trunk somewhere, but he did board the train at 4 a.m. September 27th to go to Baltimore.
Right. A very fateful day leading up to a very tragic occurrence. So I'm going to shift up the timeline a couple days. October 3rd, 1849, Poe is found delirious. He's lying in the gutter outside, I believe, a polling station.
Yes.
But we'll get into that in a bit. But this led to one of the more sort of common theories about the circumstances of his death, because he's not making any sense and he seems delusional. And many people think that severe alcoholism contributed to his death. But was Poe really such a heavy drinker at this time? And where did this narrative come from, if not?
Okay, so he actually wasn't a big drinker at that time, and I don't think alcohol really caused his death either. As I said, he had joined the Sons of the Temperance movement. The Temperance movement was a social activist group to get people to stop drinking alcohol and to get the government to change the laws on alcohol. And so he was a member. He had many friends who said that they did not. They had seen him during the summer, and he looked completely sober. He looked completely fine and healthy. Let me see. Oh, and the Smithsonian actually has a lock of his hair. And it was tested a couple years ago, and they said they found no significant traces of alcohol or drugs in the hair shaft. So there you go. And let me see. What was the other part of that?
The component is why is this myth so prominent?
So after he died, Griswold, his one-time friend and editor, wrote the obituaries saying that he had died of alcohol poisoning and that he was a big alcoholic and drug addict, pretty much, giving him a bad reputation.
Interesting.
And then it was picked up by Dr. Snodgrass, who was part of the temperance movement. And so, as celebrities are used today to bring notoriety to a cause, that's what they used Poe for at that time. They're like, look what happens if you drink too much. So he was held up as an example of what not to do. What not to do.
Yes. So this guy Griswold, I guess they had a feud or something then, or some kind of rivalry.
Yeah, I think just Griswold was jealous.
Yeah.
You know, because it doesn't seem open. I mean, Poe, I kind of feel like he wrote to Griswold in the year prior to his death. It didn't seem like a Griswold, well, he just had his own issues, I guess.
Jeez. Well, that's terrible.
Yeah.
It affected his legacy to this day, people believe
it did, yes.
That's too bad. But I'm wondering, so Poe, we find him passed out. He's incoherent. Yeah. So what happens between that time and his death 4 days later? Did he receive proper medical care? What were the circumstances?
Oh, good question. Yeah, the medical records have actually been lost. But what we do understand is they did take him to Washington College Hospital, so he was cared for. They contacted Dr. Snodgrass, who came right away. Did he receive proper medical care? We're talking the 1800s, right? They still believed in bloodletting. In fact, the medical device invented in the 1840s was an artificial leech. It was a metal, it looked like a pen cap, and you would pull on it, and it would kind of like, I guess, suck the skin in while also putting like these needles or these razors into your skin to let the blood out. So this is the kind of medical care that everybody was receiving. So was he cared for? Probably to the best of their standards at that time. Which
is still not very good.
Right, and then like I said, the records were lost, and then Dr. Moran, who was taking care of him, I don't want to say he got famous, but he did give lectures about, the end. And he changed dates, he changed times, he changed symptoms. So it's kind of like, what's real, what's not.
Not very credible, perhaps.
No.
It's a strange circumstance. Now, one thing that I have heard, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but there's this rumor that while he was on his deathbed, he called out Reynolds. That's the famous phrase, Reynolds. What does that mean? What is that referring to, do you think?
There's a couple of theories about that. The first is, because they thought he might have been the victim of cooping. And cooping at that time is when they would take a person, get them drunk, change their clothes, and take them back into the polling station, which, by the way, was held at a pub, and have them vote again for the candidate, so the candidate would get more votes. And so they thought he was the victim of cooping. One of the candidates at that time was named Reynolds. So that kind of gives support to that theory.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another theory is there was a journalist who had inspired Poe to write the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. I think that's it. Yeah. And so the journalist's name was Reynolds, and Reynolds theorized that the Earth had a hollow core. And so this theory is that Poe felt himself moving into this hollow core, or this dark chasm, and so he called out Reynolds. I don't know if that's very...
Sounds pretty fantastical.
Incredible, yeah.
But it is interesting.
It is
people still believe that sort of thing today, so
I know.
somehow.
I kind of like the way The Raven, the movie The Raven with John Cusack, I like the way they handled it, that it was his murderer.
Yes,
which
that
is
was
interesting. But I've never heard that theory. So it is fictional, a fictional movie.
Yes,
but,
a brief shout out to the 2012, I believe, movie The Raven, starring John Cusack. Great film.
Great film.
Very much worth seeing if you're not familiar.
And if you're a Poe nerd, look for the stuff.
You're a Poe nerd, exactly. So Reynolds, we may never know the truth behind that one, but it is quite interesting. Now, one thing that we do know, well, based on most accounts, is that Poe was thought to be physically ill at the time of his death. There have been many theories about what led to it. Of course, we've had people say it was rabies, flu, heart disease, epilepsy, syphilis, many others, and most recently there's been a theory that he had a brain tumor.
Yeah.
I believe because when his body was exhumed, there was said to be something rattling around in the head, which many people postulate could have been a brain tumor that outlived the rest of the tissue in the brain. But what do you believe may have been behind this
so I haven't heard that theory
That's
about
a new
the
one.
brain.
That's a new one, apparently.
Okay, good. So there are many theories.
Yeah.
The rabies comes from because he did have wild animals. He did own wild animals, so I'm told. And there's stories that he would actually go into the woods and pet animals. I don't know if that's true or not. So that's where the rabies comes from. But he obviously didn't have a bite mark. He didn't have any other symptoms, I guess, of the rabies. One of the fantastical theories that I heard was diabetes, that he had diabetes, which I don't believe, because adult onset diabetes is very a modern thing. You know, he wasn't drinking. He didn't have the sugar temptations that we have today. So I think that's a little fantastical. Let me see, what's another theory? Oh, the theory that, what was it? Oh, cholera. That it was the effects of
he
cholera.
passed through, right?
Yeah.
Philadelphia, you said.
Yes. And I guess there's some credibility to that, because cholera can cause low blood sugar. Low blood sugar mixed with dehydration can cause mental confusion. But I was thinking about, I was doing the research, we have a very modern term, Lyme's disease, right?
Oh, yes.
That's only been labeled since the 1980s, 1990s. So, but Lyme's disease, looking over what his symptoms were, and Lyme disease, it kind of had some, I don't know, credibility maybe. So he did complain about headaches. That's a symptom of Lyme. That's a symptom of Lyme disease. At one point, he was diagnosed with heart disease. Heart problems are a symptom of Lyme disease. What else? And definitely when Lyme disease attacks the brainstem, that's where you get the mental confusion.
Right.
And he was around animals.
Yes.
So he could have easily, and a tick bite could have easily been missed as well.
And I'm sure, he traveled throughout the Northeast in these different places.
Absolutely.
The tall grass.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting theory.
Yeah, I mean, because we have to remember it was very rural, you know, no paved streets, So.
That's a fascinating one. I haven't heard that.
That's mine.
That's well, okay, so there's an alternate theory, health aside, that the more sort of salacious theory that's inspired many of the, like The Raven and other works, that Poe may have been beaten, like you said, cooping before his death, or even outright murdered.
Yeah.
Can you touch on some of these possible suspects or motives for such a crime?
Absolutely.
I
could just make some. No. Well, the cooping, because the change of clothes and the physical condition he was found in, but also if you think about all the enemies, that Poe made. If you think about, he was rumored to have been having an affair at one point with a married woman, sometimes with more than one married woman. So there's some husbands there that we could blame. Definitely, I think we need to take a look at Griswold. He had some serious issues. The lady he was going to marry, Elmira Shelton, her children did not want her marrying him. So I think we do have a pool of suspects there that we can pull from.
Fascinating. Well, it seems I had no idea that Poe was such a Lothario, a ladies' man.
He was, yes.
Wow. Well, I guess he was a romantic.
He was a Southern gentleman, and he did write poetry.
That helps. Right? Well, that's fascinating. Yeah. So it could have been a jilted spouse, or a relative.
Yes.
That's a long list.
It is
of suspects. So I guess all this should culminate in: do you have a personal preference? Do you have a theory? Do you have something that you stake higher than the rest in your own belief
as to what happened? To him? I guess I'm more practical in that matter, because if you think of it, we're talking about the 1800s. They did not have the health and hygiene standards that we have today. 1840, like 14,000 people died of cholera. 20,000 people died of typhoid. We had smallpox, yellow fever, and people were dying of the flu, of these real simple things. So I think it could have been any of those things.
Yeah, it's almost too hard to narrow it down. Well,
it is now with the lack of his medical records, and
So we may never know. But I want to, on a more sort of abstract level, since you know so much about Poe's life, is there any one moment in Poe's life, any particularly tragic moment, or a bad moment that could have ultimately led to his downfall or spiraling?
Well, I guess everybody thinks of after Virginia died. He did drink excessively after she died, and he was quite heartbroken. But it seems by like 1948, 49 that he was in good spirits and good health. So, you never quite know, I suppose,
Right. The truth is there's more nuance and more complications, obviously.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I'm wondering then, about the public zeitgeist and the immediate reaction at the time to Poe's death. Was he considered an important literary figure then?
Oh, yes, I think so, yes. And even more so in London and in Paris, he was, I think, even more held up than to the American public. But he was a celebrity in some sense of the words, but not in the sense that we think of celebrity today. So, and news didn't travel that fast, And so, Poe died. And so there was like this outcry, but the voices that were heard more loudly and more clearly was, Griswold and Snodgrass giving him a bad reputation. So, but then his friends and family did, push back, and his work fell out of favor for a little while, but then it did come back into favor.
So he had respect. Did he have respect among literary peers, or was that only later?
Oh, very good question. Very good question. And I think it's a little of both. I think he was more well respected abroad than he was by the American authors, but not all of them, and there's always rivalry, right? They always want to put each other down. So I think he was respected. I think he was missed. I think he was the first, he was kind of the inventor of the detective story, the inventor of this burlesque of horror film. He gave us what we have today, so.
Yeah, well, I am personally grateful for him, as are many others. That's what we do here. That's what we talk about here every week. So we wouldn't have a show, and a million other shows and movies wouldn't exist either.
Yes, tribute.
Yes, he deserves everything he gets in that respect. And speaking of tributes, what's your take on this, the Poe toaster?
The Poe toaster.
Can you explain a little bit about this Poe toaster and what he does?
Yes. So starting, they believe, about the 1930s, somebody started leaving 3 red roses and a bottle of cognac. I think the cognac was opened and the guy drank from it and left the rest. I think, I'm not positive.
Good for him.
But I know, right? You should have a drink with a dead poet. So now there's a couple theories to that. I kind of think that it was just somebody who loved Poe. I want to think it was a literature professor. It was probably a reader, probably a writer, probably somebody who felt like Poe didn't get his due in life. And then it became a regular thing. In 1993, he said that it would be passed, and somebody else would continue. In 1999, a note appeared and said the torch has been passed, and somebody would continue. And all through, there was notes left, not every year, but there was notes left saying, tributes to Poe, a great American writer, things like that. After the new person, which is believed to be a son of whoever started it, the notes got a little bit more political, and then they even said something about the Baltimore Ravens losing, but they didn't lose that year. I don't remember what year that was, but they didn't lose that year. And then 2006, some people tried to stop the Poe toaster and find out who he was, because I guess he always wore a cape, and and it was anonymous. It was supposed to be a tribute, but they tried to stop, and so that kind of I marked the beginning of the end, I want to think. And then in 2009, the last of the roses and the cognac appeared, and that was exactly 200 years after his birth.
Wow.
So January 19th, 2009. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And again, it lines up all so perfectly, as it continues to do with Poe.
Right? Yes.
A literary life to the end. And on that note, I'm wondering, you personally, obviously an aficionado of literature, and what is it that's driven you to care so much specifically about Edgar Allan Poe, and why do you think his work is so relevant to this day?
Well, obviously everybody that he inspired and continues to inspire, and the language, the use of the language. Right? He wrote these terrible stories, but beautifully written.
Absolutely.
Beautifully poetic. Even his fiction was very poetically written, very rhythmically written. So that's why I love his writing. And he touches something deep inside all of us, right? And this is why his literature and his legend has continued.
Absolutely.
So, and I imagine, I think he's one of the first writers that I read. And I'm not one who just reads The Raven and says, oh, that's great. No, once I get something, you know, I read everything. So I was pretty familiar with all of his work, pretty young. And so, and I just knew that I wanted my writing not to just say something, but to say it beautifully, I think.
Well, you just said that beautifully. So thank you so much for coming on. Again, my guest today has been author Noreen Lace. I can't thank you enough for being with me. You can find her additional work, including 2 novellas, West End and Life of Clouds, as well as a book of short stories, Here in the Silence. They're available on Amazon. And I believe your newest book of short stories, Namaskray.
Namaskray, yeah.
Namaskray
I think it's this week. I'm sorry.
This week? Really?
I think it's this week.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, they're even sooner than I thought. So please go out and check out all of that material. Noreen, you've been wonderful. And I want to thank all my guests, all my viewers, as per usual, for tuning in and hearing about the brilliant and mysterious life and death of Edgar Allan Poe. Please join us next week as we delve into another unsolved mystery, and have a great rest of the week.